agriculture inside the cycle of conferences on contentious inputs in the framework of the European project Organic Plus, in which l'Escola Agrària Manresa is part, together with other European entities. Els vídeos que veureu a continuació són en anglès i estan subtitulats al català. I al final de tots els vídeos hi haurà un torn de preguntes perquè pugueu parlar amb els ponents que s'hauran pogut connectar. All the videos that you will listen are in English with Catalan subtitles. There will be a round of questions at the end of the session, okay, to ask directly, and we will make a direct translate of the questions. Les preguntes les podreu fer en l'apartat final, les podreu fer en el xat. Ja us explicarem quan arribi el moment com. The questions, you will be able to do them by chat, and we will explain you later how. Totes les presentacions que escoltareu ara estaran disponibles al RuralCat a partir del mes de juliol. Les penjarem totes juntes, tot el cicle de conferències. The presentations will be available at RuralCat from July, and we will put them all together, the seven conferences, as well as the 2 visits that we will do this week. Aquest primer vídeo que escoltareu és una introducció al projecte Organic Plus. Les que ja us heu connectat en altres jornades, ja l'haureu, són aquests 10 primers minuts, són els mateixos, però la resta de la jornada no. This first video that you will listen is an introduction to the Organic Plus project, and all the ones that you had access to other conferences, you have already heard. Us recordem que aquestes sessions són gravades. We remind you, these sessions are being recorded. I res més, espero que gaudiu. Thank you very much. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to this introduction of our international course in contentious inputs in organic agriculture. It's held at the Escola Agrària de Manresa in Catalunya, and I will give you the introduction. My name is Ulrich Schmutz, and I'm the coordinator of the Organic Plus project. I'm also a professor at Coventry University. We have a center, it's called Rayns Organic Gardens, and it's a center for agroecology, water and resilience. So you find my details there. And I will give you a little bit of an overview of this course, so then you have a good way into it in the following sessions. So welcome again. So we are a team of 2 large EU-funded projects called RELAX and Organic Plus. I'm the leader of one of them. Lucius Tamm is the leader of the second one. And together we had 8 million euros funding of 4 years. And we are now in our final year, and we have a lot of results to share with you, but we haven't solved all the issues. So I want to give you a little bit of a issue where we are now. Organic farming has phased out contentious input a long time ago. It's something which has been done, and it's part of the DNA of organic movement. So it started with phasing out chemical fossil fuel fertilizers. We don't use them, and that's part of the organic regulation. We have phased out synthetic fossil fuel-based pesticides. There's also no GMOs. And there's also quite strict regulation on animal cruelty, or on a positive word, how to care about animals. So the word organic or agroecology, biological agriculture, aims to be a fairer, more ecological, more caring and healthier system innovation. These are also the principles of the organic movement. However, it is not perfect. So we need further improvements to organic. We can't just stay there. And this is in some way the kind of organic plus principle which we want to share with you, and which you also as a farmer or advisor are part of in a way to continuously improve organic. So I'm going a little bit back in a way to set the context of this course. So let's go just back before we look forward. So organic started almost 100 years now with a movement called organic biological farming and also biodynamic farming. So we go back quite a long time. There's a lot of history there. And then in 72, there was formation of an international, so both of those earlier things were a bit more in Central Europe, Switzerland, and what is now Poland. And then there was an international movement, the International Federation of Organic Agricultural Movements, that was founded in Paris. And this was a time before there was regulation on organic farming. And this came in Europe and in the EU in 1991. And ever since, regulation has been done. So our work, in a way, is to look where we are now. So are we in this year, 2022? We have just had an updated regulation on organic farming, and obviously have to say that there is also a big war, obviously, now going on in the Central Europe, which is also an issue of some of the contentious inputs we say later, especially oil and minerals. But we'll move on with that and want to look more forward. So what was the project about? So looking forward is going to 2030. So we will have an official target from the Green Deal of the European Commission that we will have we aim for 25% organic land use in the EU. This is quite a big aim. Some countries like Germany, Austria, some smaller ones, they aim even further for 30%, and some of them have already achieved that. Liechtenstein, I think, is the highest, over 40%. So this is the big setup where we are in. And going now into the course, as I mentioned, we have those two projects. You can see their title. They both have a website where you can study and Google that in more detail. And both projects were kind of organized a little bit. We knew each other already that we were applying. It is still competitive, and other projects were not funded, but we try to be very synergistic always, so that we can kind of, in combinations, can solve these issues of contentious input. So your whole course now will then tackle the contentious inputs we see now in organic farming and how we can overcome them in detail. So we have to go into the detail of copper. We have to go into the detail of mineral oils. We will present you experiments, not everything we have done in this course, but just selected information and results on that. And then we will go in the following days, you will hear more about vegan fertilizers, you will hear more about peat and the replacement of peat, you will hear more about plastic use. All of these are identified contentious inputs. And then we have a big section also on livestock farming, because there we have also a lot of contentious inputs, synthetic vitamins, antibiotics, anthelmintics, so this is the treatment against worms, and also the animal bedding, which is often with conventional straw, which then has the pesticides in it as well. And we are concerned about the animals eating them, but also contamination. We also had a big part of research on social science. We're not covering that in this course, but we will work also on the modeling, on the phase out. So you will get information on how, on the life cycle assessment and the social assessment, socio-economic assessment of the alternatives, and how we can model the phase out. So this is a little bit, and we follow this same template in all the different sections you have. And then you obviously have also 2 days of on-farm visits, because all this information needs to be put in practical, real farming changes, because otherwise it doesn't really make any difference to the environment and has limited or no input, which is obviously impact, which is important. So based on the information and the work we are doing, looking at alternatives, we then make recommendations mainly to the European Union and also other sector bodies who may have standards, when to phase out some of these remaining identified contentious inputs. So, for example, and this is not, it's like a planning tool here. It's not the final answer, but we think the phase out has to be staggered. So some of the things we can phase out fairly quickly. For others, we need at least 10 years more time, research, alternatives need to be prepared. We don't want to ruin the organic movement by going too fast, but also we want to reach 30% or 25% in the next decade. So we need to do that in a growing market. And then there's others like antibiotics, which may take even longer to completely phase out. However, that may actually not be true, because depending on the research we do, it could actually also change. So this is another overview. So, and I also will finally end that we also already, because we are at the end of the project, we are thinking about the next steps. So I call them phase out mission proposals. So we want to have further research commissioned by the EU, and that hasn't been done yet. Also parts of it have. And they would be slightly different, because our work we're showing you was work which was more commissioned in research labs and trial sites. And this wider phase out would be even more connected to farmers. We already connected a lot to farmers in our project, but an innovation action would also include farmers as micro enterprises. So then we can do commission trials on farms, so that everyone is kind of has help in a way to try the alternatives and also create. We will hear, this is another word I haven't mentioned yet. For some of them, we also think you need a system solution, which means a redesign of the organic system, which in many cases is a little bit, what we could say, old-fashioned, because it was converted from conventional farming. So we have a system like in apple trees, citrus, which worked really well under the planting densities of conventional agriculture. Then it was converted to organic, and now it doesn't really work so well. So we need to have a system redesign, including agroforestry and mixed farming, so we get a whole new system where we don't have these problems. And this is all from me now. So I thank you for your attention up to now. So I would say, please enjoy the course, and obviously some of you may be more interested in horticulture and other more in livestock, and that's clear. But I think this project has also helped, because it has so many issues, help bring the organic movement together and remind everyone that there is this interconnection between mixed farming, livestock, and even in horticulture, where you can do that. And then my final word is, please also take some action. Do some experiments on your farm. Try some of these alternatives and see how it goes. And then I hope we can create an organic plus system, a world almost, where we do not need all these fossil fuel products. Obviously, a main thing is also the climate change. Heat, for example, if we don't use it, we can protect all the peat bogs on our planet, and they have an enormous potential to mitigate climate change. So So, you know, it may look like a small step for you on your farm, but it is actually quite important to come to this bioeconomy or cyclical economy, as we call it, on a larger scale. So thank you again for your interest in this, and I hope you enjoy the course. Bye.
Hello, I'm Judith Conroy at Coventry University, and I'm going to talk about peat in horticulture, in particular in the United Kingdom. So first of all, I think it's just important to set the scene and explain why peatlands are important. So peatlands exist throughout the world, and the UK and Ireland are home to quite a lot of peatland habitat as well, although a lot of this has been degraded now. And peatlands perform several vital functions. So they're kind of habitats that aren't found in other places. They have plants and animals in them which are unique to peatlands. And once they're gone, once they've been destroyed, then they're really hard to rehabilitate or to replace. Once they're gone, they're gone. They play a really important part in the management of floodwater and heavy rainfall. So because they're kind of big spongy habitats, they soak up water and stop it going into rivers quite so quickly. So they can be really important in flood management. And that also means they're important to water quality for human consumption further downstream. They also store masses of carbon, and once they're harvested for horticulture, then that carbon is generally released into the atmosphere. And I think the fact that they hold carbon is something that's gained them quite a lot of attention recently with the climate emergency. Another role of peatlands as well, which might not be so obvious, is that they contain a lot of really important archaeological evidence. So because of the anaerobic conditions, there are artifacts within them, and peat mining destroys that as well. So peat itself, it's mostly sphagnum moss, a species of moss, which can't fully break down because of the damp habitat. So there are other plants in there as well, but primarily it's sphagnum moss. And it accumulates very, very slowly, normally about 1 millimetre per year, depending on the exact bog and where it is in the world and the conditions. So because it accumulates so very slowly, it's not renewable. It's not like trees, which grow within a time span that we can envisage as humans, within a human lifespan. It's very, very slow. So really a more accurate description of it would be as a young fossil fuel. It's kind of that kind of a time scale. And in the UK and Ireland and in other parts of Europe, particularly in the sort of the Baltic region, huge amounts of peat are extracted industrially for horticulture, and huge great machines strip the vegetation off the bog. They drain the water by cutting channels in it and take big hunks of peat away, and then generally speaking that habitat's gone. And if it is rehabilitated, it's a very, very slow process. So just a few other points as well. Internationally, peatlands store more carbon than all of the forested land. So although they're not necessarily a very obvious habitat, they're really significant in that role. And when peatlands are being burned or drained, then they, like I said, release a lot of carbon dioxide, and that's actually responsible for about 5% of the global carbon budget. So it really is quite significant. Specifically in the United Kingdom, over 90% of the UK's lowland raised bog has been destroyed or degraded primarily for horticulture. So that's, it's a really precious habitat now. And the picture on the slide there is of cotton grass, which is one of the more unusual plants that only really grows in peatland habitats. It doesn't grow anywhere else. A couple of other things in the UK, we also have a lot of peaty soils. So this is agricultural land, but because of agricultural practices and the way it's treated, this tends to erode. And a particular part of the UK where we have a lot of this is East Anglia in the far east of the country. And it's estimated that about 85% of our peat topsoils have been eroded in the last 200 years. also on here, the last thing to mention, a third of peat that's used in the UK horticulture is actually produced here, but we also get a lot of it from Ireland and also some from Northern Europe as well. So just a little history of peat use in UK horticulture. It's ubiquitous now, it's everywhere, it's used by everybody, but it's actually a relatively new thing. In the sort of the great age of the Victorian walled garden, gardeners would have made their own mixes, mostly from materials derived on site. If they lived near to peatlands, they may have had access to a small amount of peat, but it was never a big ingredient. And this only really came to happen in the 1930s when the Joan Research Centre developed potting mixes. They contained a small amount of peat. They weren't kind of peat heavy, but they kind of paved the way for more peat coming in. So as the horticultural industry and trade progressed, then we started to get ready-made growing media on sale to the public, and that contained peat, with the Joan Innes mixes being a precursor to that. In the 1950s, we really started to have the sale of containerized plants, so people could go to a shop and buy a plant in a pot, and very often the media that was grown in was peat. In the 1960s, this carried on, and people started to buy their own growing media in bags. And one reason that peat was often a big ingredient in that is because it's very lightweight. It's easy to transport and easy for people to carry home. In the 1960s, not everybody had a car, so that was a factor. And this kind of continued really through the later 20th century. So in the 1970s, we started to get big garden centres, so big shops where people would go and buy lots of gardening related goods, and bags of growing media and also potted plants were sold more and more. In the 1980s, we started to get the first major concerns over the use of peat and the fact that peatlands were being degraded to produce it. And then in the 1990s, we started to get more actual research into the alternatives. So, there's kind of a growing momentum. In the 2000s, that continued, and there was actually some government funding for research and development, and also manufacturers looked at the alternatives. And then by the time we got into the 2010s, there was actually a government white paper that proposed a phase out of peat in horticulture. Hasn't happened yet, but it's on the cards. So in the last decade, because of this work to reduce peat in growing media, the actual proportion of peat in most bags of growing media has reduced. So in 2019, about 48% of everything in the average bag of growing media was peat. And within a year, by 2020, that reduced to 41%. However, it's important to note that because largely with the pandemic, home gardening became a lot more popular, because sales overall of growing media increased a lot, then the overall amount of peat increased significantly. So that's sort of the green line on the graph tells you that. So although the proportion of peat in bagged growing media has fallen, because sales overall have increased, peat use in the UK has increased over the last 2 years, unfortunately. The slide here, this details, it gives some information on the steps to phase out peat. So what's happened in terms of getting rid of it. So at the beginning, you can see in the late 1980s, early 1990s, there started to be concerns about peat use. So Plant Life are a charity concerned with plant conservation in the UK, and they commissioned an inquiry into peatlands. HDRA, which is now called Garden Organic, produced something called an Organic Gardening Charter, and they had guidelines in which they recommended that gardeners no longer used peat. And this momentum carried on. So in 2011, we had the government white paper, which actually introduced voluntary targets for removing peat from horticulture. So the targets were for in 2015, local authorities should stop using it. By 2020, amateur gardeners should stop using it. And both of those targets have fallen by the wayside, unfortunately, and haven't yet happened. And there is still a target to remove peat from professional horticulture in the UK by 2030. So also in 2011, we had the setup of the Sustainable Growing Media Task Force. So this was an industry group tasked with doing something about the problem, basically. and the responsible sourcing scheme, which my colleague Margi will tell you about later on in the session, is sort of an industry response and a framework for trying to reduce the amount of peat in growing media. In 2015, DEFRA, so that's the UK government's department which deals with agriculture, horticulture, farming, they had a big review and a 25-year plan, and that proposed peat to be phased out as well. And in 2016, the responsible sourcing calculator was launched, and the responsible sourcing calculator is an outcome of the Sustainable Growing Media Task Force that had been established 5 years earlier. But it was a soft launch to the industry, so it wasn't yet at that stage something that consumers, that people buying bags of growing media would know about. A quiet few years. In 2018, DEFRA's 25-year plan was published, and that reaffirmed the commitment to the 2030 target. So it was, it's still on the cards. And then in 2020, there was a government response to the CCC 2020, and that kind of emphasised the role of peatlands, particularly in the release of carbon dioxide. So it's sort of a growing momentum. In 2021, Soil Association, who are the UK's biggest organic certifier, in their standards, they said that they would look for growers to phase out the use of peat by 2025, so more growing momentum. And then in 2022, so this year, in spring of this year, the responsible sourcing calculator, which had been devised by the Sustainable Growing Media Task Force, was actually launched for the public. So now, from this year, if you go into a garden centre in the UK, the bags of growing media will have a rating on them. And like I said, that's what Margi's going to talk about in more detail. But it's basically to give the public more information on what they're buying and what's in bags of growing media. So that sort of sets the scenes for the UK. Obviously, I appreciate it will be different in other European countries, but I think as a case study, the fact that we've got targets in place for a ban in the UK is they've not all been met, but it's still something that's looking like it will happen. I think it's quite an interesting case study. In the Wider Organic Plus project, we've also done some trials here at Coventry, which my colleague Frances will talk about. And in other countries in the project, particularly Spain, Greece, Turkey, Germany and Norway, we've conducted other trials with various materials available in those countries. So thank you very much for listening to me. Hopefully that gives you an introduction to peat and its use in horticulture. And I'll pass you over to my next colleague. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Francis Rayns. I'm from Coventry University in the United Kingdom, and I'm going to talk to you about the research work that we've done within Organic Plus on peat alternatives, focusing on the production of seedlings or vegetable transplants. We started out by doing a survey of UK growers to find out what they currently use in growing media that they made themselves. Obviously, some people prefer to buy it in, but the idea was to see what people could do to make their own growing media. And it seemed that the most common ingredient was some form of compost, either kind of farm waste compost or kitchen compost. There were various other things used as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later on. But compost was definitely a popular ingredient. And we decided to focus our investigations on the use of wood chip compost as a growing media, and looking at two particular aspects: blending the compost with other materials to dilute it, and also to look at the patterns of nutrient availability, either assessed by means of how well the plants grew, or we did also do chemical analysis as well. And in order to achieve this work, we worked very closely with a UK grower, somebody called Ian Tolhurst, who runs a CSA, a box scheme called Tolhurst Organics in the south of England. You can see a picture of Tolly here demonstrating his compost to one of our colleagues, Margi, who I think will be presenting later on in this session. And he's standing on one of the windrows or the heaps of compost that's well advanced. You can see just there in the picture on the right an example of the finished product. So we focused on this composted wood chip. We looked at diluting it with different amounts of vermiculite. This is something that Ian Tolhurst does. He includes 30% vermiculite, and that's a contentious input in its own right because of the energy that's needed into processing it, and also the fact that it's a mined product. So there's kind of environmental destruction associated with vermiculite use. So that's sort of contentious in the same way that peat is. So we were interested in seeing how this vermiculite could be replaced. And one of the things we considered was extruded wood that's made by one of our German partners, extruded poplar wood. So we mixed that with the composted wood chip at various different rates. You can see there in the picture in the middle of the screen, that's a kind of a general view of the trials, kind of the lettuce trial in this case. And we, throughout the growth of the lettuces, we assessed a whole range of parameters, how well they emerged, and you can see that's shown in the graphs. We use both lettuces and leeks as test crops. You can see in the case of the lettuces, the emergence in all the treatments was quite rapid. Interestingly, the worst performing one in terms of the lettuce was Melcourt, which is a commercially available control growing media that we use. So it was interesting that all the variations on the wood chip compost did better than that. What we did find is that the worst performing growing media were the ones in which we included the extruded poplar wood. If you look at the graph at the bottom right hand of the screen, you can see there the three growing medias with extruded wood did very poorly indeed. As you can see in the photo in the center, you can see there the very small ones. And indeed, the best performing growing media was the one which was just wood chip on its own without any dilution with anything. So it was better without the vermiculite and certainly without the wood chip. Having said that, all the lettuces did remarkably well when they were transplanted out. In the picture at the top right of the screen, you can see that is the trial where we planted them out. They all, even the tiny ones, came to reasonably sized lettuce plants after a couple of months of growing outside. So it just goes to show that that size at transplanting isn't everything. We also did chemical analysis. We looked first of all at the available or mineral nitrogen, so that's the nitrate plus the ammonium nitrogen, and generally in most of the growing media, you can see in the graphs on the right there, the one at the top was sort of at the time of sowing, and the lower graph is 94 days later, so that was at the time of the transplants were planted out. Generally, the levels of mineral nitrogen rose during that time in most of the treatments, except for the ones where there was large amounts of this extruded wood fiber, and that is the explanation as to why the growth was so poor in those. They were short of available nitrogen, so that's that was certainly an issue. Maybe we could have overcome that by feeding them with a kind of a nitrogen-rich source of kind of incorporating maybe some sort of bean powder or something like that into the growing media. That's something to be sort of experiment with in the future. We also measured other parameters, including the electrical conductivity. And there you can see that the highest values were in the Melcourt control. And this, again, is the explanation of why there was the poor germination in the lettuce transplants, because often high conductivity, usually due to excessive concentrations of potassium. It can be other ions as well, but usually potassium is to blame. There was high levels of that, and that inhibited the germination in the lettuce transplants. So we measured this various chemical parameters which complemented the growing media trials that we did. As I say, all of that was about using wood chip compost. Of course, there are a whole range of other materials that can be used for on-farm produced growing media. Various sorts of plant waste. I mentioned this at the beginning. This is something that people used in the survey, or said that they used. Many growers might have access to animal manures and bedding that could be included. They are likely to be high in nutrients and sort of kind of complement perhaps some more woody materials that tend to be lower in nutrients. There's also the possibility of using leaf mold, which can be either gathered up from sort of woodland areas or sometimes can be obtained from urban areas. Sometimes councils collect fallen leaves. Could be a useful base material for making growing media from. And of course there is loam or basically just soil. This could be molehill soil. Sometimes people find that's a very good way of collecting the soil from molehills. It's quite fine and friable. And indeed, loam used to be a really sort of traditional material for including in growing media. It's kind of fallen out from favour because of the weight of it, and so it's not really ideal for putting in bags and transporting and selling commercially. But if used within the farm, sort of on the holding, that can be quite a useful thing to use. So all of those can be our materials that can be sourced on farm. There are also various brought in materials that can be purchased and used. Green waste compost, which ideally is kind of has some sort of quality certification associated with it. In the UK, this is called the PAS 100 certification, to assure that it's not contaminated with herbicides and things like that. There's also coconut fibre that can be used, various other types of wood product, commercially available wood product, byproducts of the furniture manufacturing industry or kind of the wood processing industry more generally. And of course, vermiculite, which we've talked about, but also perlite, which can be used. Both of these, though, do have issues of sustainability because of the destruction of the environment associated with mining them and processing them. So a whole, and to that extent, maybe sort of sand or grit or something more inert possibly could be a better alternative to kind of physically lighten the structure and prevent waterlogging and make it more suitable for growing materials in. So that concludes the presentation that I've got for you now. If any of you have got any questions about anything I've said, I'd be happy to answer them in the discussion section later on in the session. So thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning, my name is Rafaela Cáceres. I work at IRTA, and I will present the experiments in pots that we conducted in Turkey and Catalonia. I will explain, first of all, this experiment that on behalf of Alev from MFAL in Turkey, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, and in order to find alternatives to replace peat, in March 2018, they set up a composting experiment using several organic raw materials. As a carbon source, they introduced in the pile 70% of olive pronins and 10% of aromatic plant debris. As a nitrogen source, they use 18% of grass clippings and 2% of horse manure. In addition, they use several starters actually two, Trichoderma and Bacillus. The composting process they conducted were with the static method and lasted for 8 months, and thermophilic temperatures were achieved like 70 degrees. In the external part of the pile, green mycelium, Trichoderma, was observed in the same month, in April 2018, showing that the inoculation was successful. On May, the first mushrooms, Coprinus mushrooms, were found in the compost, and it's now that Coprinus species produce cellulose enzyme. In April 2020, they conducted a study to raise up olive samplings in substrates. They were made by several substrates. They use the compost obtained after composting we have seen in the previous slide. This compost had black color and it was smelling like humus. The second substrate was fibers. These fibers were obtained from an extrusion process that was held in Potsdam, in Germany, at the Leibniz Institute for Agricultural Engineering and Bioeconomy. The third substrate was commercial peat growing media, at least 40% of peat. And the fourth substrate was a sand-based substrate. Well, after growing up the olive saplings during 6 months, the following results were obtained. Compost and peat, as you can see in the picture, had the largest plants with 100 survival rate. 98% of plants survived in sand and 81% in fiber. Fiber, which was the only treatment with no weed growth, had about 30% reduced growth as compared with sand, which had 90% and 78% growth compared with peat and with compost, respectively. As a conclusion, olive samplings were successfully grown in composted olive runnings, and the results were similar to the control material based on peat. The sanitation of the compost and fibers, the alternative materials, were ensured, as on one hand, compost achieved, as I told, thermophilic temperatures, and on the other hand, during extrusion, temperatures used to rise to 120 degrees. For more information about these experiments, you can check this article you can find in the website of the International Society for Horticultural Science. After the 6-month agronomic trial, I explained it before, the trial was extended for 6 months more. Glomus in a liquid solution was added 3 times in 3 weeks to the pots, just to the pots with fiber. This was in order to stimulate root development. So finally, the final observations and measurements were performed during 12 months. And the results after these 12 months for this pot trial was that the compost was successfully useful as a growing media for olive saplings when compared to peat and sand-based substrates. This can be attributed to the stability and maturity properties of the process carried out. At the end, plants grow in the fiber substrates performed as well as compost. This was due for sure for the glomus enrichment in this fiber treatment. This addition improved the root parameters that were the number and the length of the roots. So thank you for your attention. And this is the presentation dealing with the experiments held in Turkey. Hi again. Now I will explain the experiment on pot production held here in Catalonia. It was an experiment with lavender. And you can see here the main characteristics of the experiment. We held this experiment last year in Cabrils near Barcelona. And as you can see in pots, in 4.5 liter pots, and we irrigated the plants with water, just water, and we use a drip irrigation system. And the triggering of irrigation was by solar radiation, and also we modulated that with the percent of drainage we obtained. We conducted this experiment with an organic management, and we also added, as you can see in the picture on the left, you can see boxes that were prepared to collect leachates in order to control the volume produced, and also to take samples to know the concentration of these leachates. The setup of the experiment consisted on these treatments, dealing with first growing media, and second with a certain fertilization strategy. We use 3 growing media. The PO1 was a compost made here in our premises, made of forest biomass, and was low in horse manure. The second one, the alternative second one, was PO3. It was a compost, also with forest biomass, but in this case was high in horse manure. And we use as a control substrate based on peat. It was a substrate certified for organic production, and we purchased this material in Germany. For fertilization strategy, we used fertilization with struvite, solid product. We also, the second treatment was using a commercial fertilizer, DCM. And another treatment for this strategy was no fertilization. So there were like 9 cases, 9 treatments for this experiment. Let's look the main characteristics of these materials. PO1, the compost with lower proportion of horse manure. You can see the low electrical conductivity it presents. The PO3 has a higher electrical conductivity because of the higher horse manure proportion. And the BioVerde, the control substrate, had low pH and very low electrical conductivity. We can see that these differences between these chemical differences, we can say, but also there were physical differences between the 3 materials regarding the water retention of them. As you can see, always in red, I will show results for PO3, for PO1. For PO3, I will show results on series and so on blue. And for control, I will use the yellow color. As you can see, the water retention of the Bio Verde, that is peat-based material, is very high, and in any case, much higher than the PO1 material. We measure different parameters for this experiment, but just with height parameters, we can see the differences we found. As you can see, and in the figure on the right, the Bio Verde plants grew much higher than PO1 materials. And in the middle of these two heats, we can see the growth of PO3 plants. Well, another thing we can see in this picture is that the fertilization was not needed for the Bio Verde substrate, because they had, apart from peat, it was a peat amended with other organic fertilizers. So in this case, Bio Verde doesn't need any fertilization, because the growth was equal in all cases. This is not the same for the other substrates, for the alternative substrates. For PO3 and PO1, as you can see, if we cannot, if we don't add fertilizers, these plants are not equal in height. Let's see the main results for this crop, for the lavender crop. I will show the results of the control substrates in yellow, the results of the PO3 plants on blue, and red will be used for the results of PO1. As you can see in the figure on the right, we have differences, clear differences in the growth of the plants. Bio Verde plants grew faster and higher in a more extent than the PO1 plants. This is quite clear and was also quite clear in the field. And another thing we can see in this figure is that the Bio Verde substrate didn't need really fertilizer for growing. So with their own fertilization, because this substrate was amended, it was enough. But the alternative substrates were low in fertilization, and these results, PO3 and PO1, as you can see in the figure, shows that the growth with no fertilization was lower in both cases. Let's see the leachate composition of the different plants, of the different treatments. The first we can see on the left, on the figure on the left is the low electrical conductivity of the PO1 substrates in all cases, and the other cases, PO3 substrate and Bio Verde, presented a higher electrical conductivity. Another thing we can see in this picture, in this figure, sorry, is that the pH at the beginning of the culture dropped at the treatment Bio Verde, and this is probably because of the material, the fertilizers inside the Bio Verde contained organic nitrogen, and this can be transformed, the organic nitrogen, into ammonia, nitrogen, and this can nitrify during the culture. And nitrification normally has as a consequence a drop in pH. On the other side, on the right, we can see the concentration of the nitrogen on the top and the phosphorus on the bottom. And as for nitrogen, we can see a small great differences between the nitrogen, ammonium, and nitric concentration in bioverde plants, and respect to the other alternative materials. It means that the growth of the standard plants were very high and was very quick, but this was due probably to this high content of nitrogen, and a consequence of this high content of nitrogen in the substrate was that not all the nitrogen was used for plant growth. So we are doing here a great impact if these leachates are not collected. So we should take care about this. But phosphorus, we didn't find really differences between the different treatments. As a conclusions, we can state different things. First, regarding our first objective, that was the use of alternative growing media. Lavender plants grew faster with commercial growing media based on peat, but bioverde doesn't need addition of fertilizers really. But this is because of a high nitrogen release through the leachates, and this can cause an impact to the environment. Another conclusion is that the growth with PO3 was good. The growth with PO1 was weak, really. And this can be explained because of the initial low fertility and also because the weak water retention. PO3 needs to be fertilized. This is another conclusion. In the future, probably struvite could be a good alternative to the used organic commercial fertilizers in this experiment. And another conclusion is that no differences in phosphorus leachate were observed between commercial and struvite fertilizers. We are now performing studies for solubilizer bacteria of phosphorus solubilizer bacteria in this experiment, and we hope to have some information on this issue. As a general conclusion, we can say that under the studied conditions, it's possible to replace the commercial growing media that was based on peat, and the commercial fertilizer too. And this will limit at the same time nitrogen losses. And what is very important in this kind of experiments is to not only to check the substrate, but also the fertility and of the materials and the added materials, the fertilizers, in order to have a global idea of how they can affect the growth of the culture. As we studied later, we gathered the leachates, and now we are going to present the leachates composition. The figure on the left, we can observe in general similar values of pH of the leachates at the end of the crop. but we can see a clear pH drop in the earlier stage of the crop of the control treatment, which was over the substrate. This effect could be due to the nitrification that can occur from the ammonia released from the fertilizer that contains this product, this substrate. It is now that nitrification can drop the pH of the media. In the same figure, we can see below the low electrical conductivity of the leachate of plants that were grown in the alternative substrate with lower horse manure. This is PO1. For sure, this low electrical conductivity is due to the low fertility of the substrate and has led to the slow growth of these plants. On the right, we have two figures, and the figure on the top, we can see the concentration of mineral nitrogen. This is ammonium nitrate of the leachate of the old treatments. We can see clearly the high concentration of mineral nitrogen in the leachates from plants that were grown in the control substrate that was based on peat. This is caused by the high fertility of this material. On the bottom, we can see the phosphorus concentration in the leachates. We are now checking with further statistical analysis that the release of phosphorus in the alternative substrate with higher proportion of horse manure is higher. This means that a positive effect of the experiment is that the phosphorus contained in the struvite has been efficiently released and uptaken by plants, but also we should adjust doses to avoid these phosphorus losses. Well, as conclusions of the whole experiment, we have divided this into two parts: growing media first. The thing is the lavender plants grew faster with commercial growing media, BioVerde, and the addition of fertilizers is not needed in this case. But the release of nitrogen in this material is also very fast and can cause an impact to the environment. Another conclusion from this part from the growing media issue is that lavender that growth with lavender that was growing in PO3 was good, but the lavender growing in PO1 was quite weak. And this will be due to the low initial fertility and the weak water retention of this material. Regarding the fertilization or in the experiment, we have also seen, we are checking that PO3 we think we can be selected an alternative growing media needs to be fertilized. Another thing that we are checking is phosphorus was released from struvite, and probably in the future struvite could be a good alternative to the used organic commercial fertilizer. But knowing that the phosphorus can be released in good conditions, the doses applied should be adjusted. We are now conducting studies on microorganisms that are able to solubilize phosphorus. So as a general conclusions, we can say that under the studied conditions, it's possible to replace the commercial growing media that was based on peat, and also we can substitute the commercial fertilizer, and limiting at the same time nitrogen losses. And we also like to highlight with this study that we need to make this kind of studies combining substrates use and fertilizers use, alternative ones if possible, linked between them. We need to link the substrates and fertilization in order to have complete studies and to understand the performance of the different materials. And that's all. I will be available for further questions or some requirement. Thank you for your attention.
My name is Joan Manubens from Escola Agrària Manresa, and I'm in the peat team of the Organic Plus project. And now I'm going to present our results of the project. During the past 2 years, we performed three consecutive trials at Escola Agrària Manresa. We saw different species in order to assess potential growth media alternatives in organic production to replace peat. Our initial hypothesis was that peat has optimal conditions for seedlings, and it was expected to find some material with similar results to peat. Conventional peat was chosen as control to start. Then two kinds of composts, letter B and C, were proposed for its use as alternative substrate. The first one with no animal raw material, and the second one made from forest biomass with solid extraction of dairy slurry. Then some extruded materials were also introduced in the first trial, always mixed with the second compost with animal input, letter C. These extruded materials were added because they have interesting texture and can be nearby byproducts. They were produced by one of the partners of the project. And in the table, you can see that the main change in the second trial was that we reduced the extruded material proportion in the mixture, number G case, letter G case. Also, that less effective treatments were removed in each consecutive trial. In the consecutive trials, second and third trials, apart from the Mediterranean forest extruded bio-waste, a second control with certified peat for organic production was added as well as commercial substrate, number G, letter G, with a little proportion of peat, the last one. About the methods, all trials were conducted in the greenhouse without heating, always with 3 trays per treatment under the same conditions. In the first one, tomato seeds was sown in the end of winter with any other variation source in order to observe just the response of the raw materials. In autumn, lettuce was sown with commercial fertilizer added in half of the samples as another source of variation in order to detect possible fertility issues with substrates. Finally, pepper and tomato were sown with the aim of testing two crops with different sensitivity to salinity. At this time, fertilizer was added at all treatments. We measured biometric parameters in all trials as height, total weight, fresh weight, dry weight, and spat, as well as chemical parameters as pH, electric conductivity, and NPK. Now let's show you the most relevant results. We rapidly see that with the first one, the extruded materials did not work at all, D, E, and F. And we noticed that the two composts apparently responded better than peat. It can be explained because of the initial fertility of the media and the nitrogen starvation effect of the extruded materials. In the second trial, all treatments responded very good, except for F1. That confirms that initial proportion of extruded material of 50% was too large. The proportion of extruded material in the mixture enhanced the response of in growth and plant development, especially in the fertilizer treatment. In case I'm talking about the case G, the green one. However, the two composts B and C still show the best development in this trial. As you can see, the scheme that we have seen in the previous trials is also repeated in the last one, despite including the second control, the letter A. In this case, the less developed treatment was the commercial mixture, number 2. What we did not expect was that taking into account the salinity of the raw materials, that scheme that I told you is also repeated with pepper seedlings, as you can see in that photo. As it is shown in the graph, electric conductivity is considerably higher in the treatments with composts, a letter B and C, and in the vineyard one, a letter G. Despite that, there are not many differences between species looking at germination and emergency phases. Maximum emergency, half emergence, and uniformity are quite similar in tomato and in pepper. And finally, we can appreciate that the development scheme is indeed repeated again, looking at the biometric parameters in this last trial. So, in conclusion, under these experimental conditions, the optimal response is seen in treatments exclusively made of compost, the letter B and C. Even better than peat ones. So, in the mixtures with 20% of extruded materials, letter G and H, had similar response as peat, as well as so we can discard substrates with higher proportion of extruded material. Also, under these experimental conditions, salinity levels of compost materials does not hinder seeding emergency and growth. We would expect it and germination issues with this electric conductivity. In the other hand, in initial fertility, as is highlighted in the table, the concentration of nitrates, the initial concentration of nitrates is high, and this it could be related. We can relate that with final growth of these cases. Probably substrate which showed higher nitrate level has more nitrifying bacteria, leading to a larger plant growth. Then fertility is an important limiting factor in these trials. And fertirrigation, we can think that fertirrigation could enhance growth in most treatments and maybe highlight other media issues. However, this kind of limited growth could be helpful for controlling the production cycle by producers, being able to speed the process when it is required. That's all. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everybody. My name is Margi Lennartsson, and I'm involved in the Organic Plus project, both on behalf of the Royal Horticultural Society in the UK and also Coventry University. I work for both organisations, and I'm involved specifically in the phasing out peat, peat used in growing media in organic horticulture. I'm going to talk about the work we are doing to assess sustainability of, in this case, alternatives to peat that we are doing within the project. So in Organic Plus, we are looking at improving sustainability of the systems in different ways. There's a specific work package 6, which deals with sort of modeling different scenarios where we have phased out various contentious inputs. And they're looking at, in the case of peat, they're looking at they're doing environmental and sustainability assessments on the impact of phasing out any of these contentious inputs, the impact that has on the farming system as a whole. So for example, in relation to peat, it might involve looking at stop using peat for growing vegetable transplant and instead using bare root transplants, which are grown directly in the soil. And they're looking at what impact that has on the farming system as a whole. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the work we're doing in work package 5, where we are looking specifically at the sustainability aspects of peat alternatives. And we are using a scheme that has been developed in the UK over the last over 10 years. And it's a scheme that's been developed in response to the wish in the UK to phase out the use of peat. So it's been developed for that purpose. And it's really about testing the alternatives to peat as sort of replacement inputs. So it's looking at the input itself, or the growing material itself, not necessarily on what impact that has on the farming system as a whole. So it's a way of comparing the sustainability for the different materials in use. So I thought it was worth perhaps just starting by talking about the types of peat alternatives that I will be talking about in this presentation. So these are the materials that are used instead of peat at present, both in conventional and organic growing media, organic or media for conventional or organic production. So the main products we're talking about are bark, wood fiber. Wood fiber is, of course, comes in many different ways. It can come as in sort of extruded wood, as we see on the picture here to the right, but it can also be sort of mechanically crushed wood and different types of wood. So that comes in different shapes and forms. We're talking about coir, or which is the fiber from the coconut production. So it's the small round fibers from there. I'm talking about green compost, and by green compost, I mean green waste compost, as is what's usually referred to. So compost made from botanical materials collected usually from parks and gardens and domestic gardens and composted at the local authority level in accordance with various standards used in most European countries. Those are the main materials used, and then recently we've also seen more use of anaerobic digestate fiber. So the solid version from anaerobic digestation facilities. In the UK, this fiber has been used so far primarily for conventional media, or media used in conventional horticulture, but it will be used in organic systems as well, but there is no availability of that at the moment. And for organic media, we see another sort of a range of composted material, composted bracken, for example, composted animal manures, sometimes the bed with or without bedding material for the animals, and even composted wool we've seen as marketed products at the moment. And it's important to say that none of these materials are used on their own, whereas peat, of course, has been used as sort of 100% in the growing media, and peat with just added nutrients of different forms. When we are using the alternatives, it's normally, the medium is normally made up of a mixture of the above ingredients. So it might be a mixture of bark, wood fiber and coir, bark, coir and green compost, and none of them really have proved possible to use as 100% in the media. So that's the materials that we'll be looking at. Now, so in the UK, you've already heard in the other presentations that already in 2011, the government initiated targets to phase out the use of peat. And in response to that, the industry was sort of put in charge of developing a scheme whereby, or working out a pathway for removing the use of peat in growing media. And that scheme was called the Responsible Sourcing of Growing Media scheme. And as I said, it's an industry-led scheme where the growing media industry, the companies that produce growing media, have worked together with growers and other people involved in organic in horticulture to look at the media that we should have for future use. This is not specifically for organic horticulture. This is for horticulture in general, because that's where we are trying to phase out the use of peat. Now, when we consider what materials are to be used, then of course, the first things that are considered is what materials are available, how much bark is available. Is there sufficient quantities of it? Is it accessible and available? But then after that, the most important things that to consider is, are the materials fit for purpose, i.e. do they work as ingredients in growing media? And can they be sustainably sourced? What are the sort of sustainability implications of using them? And those two aspects, whether they are fit for purpose and sustainably sourced, is what this growing media scheme has been looking at. As I said, it's called the Responsible Sourcing Scheme, and then basically all media, in order to be on the market, they need to have passed the test to be fit for purpose, and then to see how responsibly sourced they have been, there will be this sort of label on the packaging which will give an indication of the sustainability assessment. So that's what it looks like in practice. And you'll notice here that they are calling it responsible sourcing. It could equally be called sustainably sourcing. I mean, they've called it responsible because it deals with sort of the environmental sustainability as well as social sustainability. So that's why they call it responsible sourcing. So in the responsible sourcing scheme for growing media, basically each ingredient or each bulky material, as we call it, the bark or the coir, has to be taken through a series of criteria to assess how it scores. It's called the responsible sourcing calculator. And this starts by, for each ingredient, you set the starting point and the end point of the production change. Now the starting point will differ whether you're using a virgin material or a recycled material. So for example, a virgin material like coir is a byproduct of the coconut industry. Therefore, the starting points actually start at the production of the coconuts in the coconut plantations, because it's a virgin material, a byproduct virgin material, and then the production changes from the coconut production up until what's called the mixing table, so where the growing media is eventually mixed. So that's the whole production change for that. For something like green waste compost, the starting point, because that's a recycled material, it comes from the prunings in gardens and parks, and the starting point for that is where the material is first collected. So usually the composting site or the transfer site where that happens. So then from that whole production sort of chain, you then look at the material in relation to 7 different criteria. So the energy use, how much energy is used from the beginning to the end, water use, whether the system is socially compliant. That's mainly in relation to sort of employment legislation, that employment legislation is followed. What is the impact on habitat and biodiversity? Has there been incidences of pollution, or can the production or manufacturing of the material cause pollution? How renewable is it? And how efficient is the resource use? So that's in relation to any sort of waste produced in the production chain. And then for each of these criteria, there is a decision tree has been worked out. And some of these decision trees are very, very precise and detailed. So for example, you can see it here for water use, where you simply work out the amounts of liter of water that is required to produce 1 cubic meter of this bulky material. And then depending on the liters you have, you can then score anything from 1, which is a red, up to 20, which is a green. So the best you can score is a green and a 20. And for water use, you will, for example, only score 20 if you have used no water in the production of it. So there are similar decision trees for all of the criteria. Here you can see one for energy use, similar to the one, or works in a similar way to the one for water, i.e. you work out the kilowatt hours that are required to produce 1 cubic meter of the bulk material. That's very precisely. For habitat or biodiversity, there are different decision trees for different materials. So here you can see the one for peat, again, takes in relation to how, if the land is protected, if the peat bog is protected, how it's then how the peat is extracted, and then a lot of consideration to what are the plans for the peatland to be restored after extraction, and how is that going to be? How has that been financially secured at that restoration? So again, very detailed trees, and they look very detailed for the different materials. So here you have wood-based materials, considering what the forest, what was that used sort of before being a forest, how is the material extracted, and taken through its production chain. So what habitat and biodiversity is impacted on here. I won't show you all of these in detail. This is the decision score for renewability, which is a lot more, which is simpler. Simply looks at, is the material renewable within 50 years, 1,000 years. Obviously for peat, the material is not renewable within 1,000 years, so it will usually score a 1 here. If it's renewable within the same or site within 5 years, it can score 20 or 17. So that looks at whether the material is renewable. And then social compliance, as I said, that looks, I mean, it's interesting because that's quite a difficult criteria at the moment, because the criteria relies on having externally audited system that the production chain, or all the producers in the production chain, are compliant with employment regulations. So it's not only obviously it's the case for some, they might be compliant, but they don't have an externally audited system. But that's the way it sort of works at the moment. So if we then look at the various growing media ingredients and how they score. So each of these ingredients, wood fiber, coir, green compost, bark, and also peat, has been taken through these criteria, or taken through the calculator. And as you can see here, I've given here just examples of they are real examples, so how one type of wood fiber has scored. And you can see here they get the color code of red, orange, yellow, and green, depending on how well they score, green being the scoring the best in terms of sustainability. So for example, for wood fiber, most of the criteria you tend to score a yellow on, apart from for water, where there's sort of no water use in this case, and therefore it scored a green. And then from that, they work out an overall score also in relation to an appointed number. And in this case, that still went green for that. You can see here, coir scores mainly yellows, also some oranges. There's a higher water use for coir, and obviously this coir sample had more difficulties, or had some difficulties complying with the social compliance. But you can see that's also the case for wood fiber. They haven't got externally audited systems, basically. Green compost tend to score more greens. There is some energy use, no water use, still score red for social compliance because there's no externally audited system, but they score green for habitat and biodiversity, and for renewability, and surprisingly not the score, not for resource use efficiency, but that would basically mean that there is some waste produced in the process of producing the green compost, waste that would then normally go to landfill or something like that. So you can then see finally for peat that peat always scores, the peat sold in the UK at least always scores a red for habitat and biodiversity. It will have an impact that no peat in the UK has scored higher than a red. It's not renewable within 1,000 years, so it will always score a red for that. And then it either scores oranges or greens for the others, or yellow. So there's only one green, and that's for there's no water use. So then you can work out the total score for those. And then on the next slide, I'll show you the pictures of the different types of materials in a minute. But you can see you would then work out the overall score for the medium itself. And as I said, the medium is normally a mix of these materials. So mix one here was 20% green compost and 80% peat. And overall, that would get a score of a red. Whereas a mixture containing 10% wood fiber and 90% green compost would score a dark green. You can see here in the overall scores for the media, the values have been worked out to have also a lighter green and a dark green. And you can see here mix 3, which was a mixture of 50% coir, 25% green compost and 25% bark, scored a light green. And then that will be shown on the packages. So here are 2 media that are currently on the market for use. They're also approved for organic growing, and you can see here they have both scored a dark green. You can see the A here is where the arrow is at. They've got a rating of A. These are some other of the main types of growing media, peat-free growing media, that are currently used by organic growers. So there's the silver fiber, which is basically wood fiber and bark mixed with a bit of coir. We have coir, which is in this case, I think is almost 100% coir. So coir is perhaps the only product that can be used. And then we have the Classman, which I think is a mixture of also coir and green waste compost. And the scores for the first one is a weighting verification, and the scores for the others are not yet available, but they will become available soon. Inorganic Plus, I was perhaps just to mention briefly that I had included some more material on a previous slide, and these are examples of peat-free media that can be used by conventional growers, and they contain perhaps a wider range of the type of materials, but they've all been formed here. The bark and the wood fiber or the green compost have all been formulated also with artificial fertilizers, which indeed is the case for most growing media available. So they are not, so although they're peat-free, they are not suitable for use by organic growers. But you can see here that in fact, all of these that I show here scored a light green, so a B rating overall. And that's what will be available then for both the retailers to know and then decide whether they will stock perhaps only materials that score a rating A or B or C, avoiding D and E, the red and the orange, or up to the consumer to decide how they want, what rating they want the materials they purchase to have. So within Organic Plus, we've also looked at not only the sort of replacing peat by other purchased inputs or using peat-free growing media developed that you would sort of buy into the farm as an input and use on the farm. We're also looking at materials that could be produced on farm that would obviously lead to greater sustainability, that if the farm itself produced its own sort of local materials and produced the growing media on farm. And here in the UK, we have worked on a wood chip compost that has been produced on farm. So it's composted wood chip. It's a type of compost that's been developed by this quite well-known organic grower called Ian Tolhurst. And he basically imports to his farm wood chips from a local tree surgeon or somebody who is out pruning trees and doing tree surgery sort of on big branches, and that's chipped at the site where it's pruned and then taken to Ian's farm. That's only a couple of kilometers away from where it lives, so there's very little transportation to the site, and then the material is composted on the farm, and it's composted sort of rather unusually only as wood chips. So it's quite a slow composting process, and only very little other green material goes into the compost. So it's basically a sort of a fungal composting process that he then say will take about a year to produce the compost, and he then used that wood chip compost to blend his own growing medium that he uses for raising transplants or growing in containers in either way. And we have looked at that wood chip compost, how that would score in the calculator. What would be the benefits of using that local material and composting it on the farm? And just for interest, so we've done this more as an academic exercise, taking the material through the calculations, and we are still in the process of doing it. So some of the values are still to be confirmed. And I've just compared it here with a typical example of green compost, which I guess this material is most similar to, but green compost produced at the local authority level. So it's just to see how producing it on farm will affect. And basically the energy score here is very, very low. He uses some energy to turn the material. I mean, interestingly, because this is a recycled material, the same as the feedstock used for the green compost, the starting point for calculating the energy use is actually at the farm when the material has been delivered, and it comes in already chipped. So the energy used for transportation and shipping is not counted within the calculations, because the starting point of this recycled material is actually at the site of the composting, the same as the green waste compost would be. And then because it's only turned a few times in the process, it scores at the lowest sort of level of energy use per cubic meter, whereas the green waste compost would have been turned, there's more energy used in the production and screening and chipping of all of that. There's no water use at all in Ian Tolhurst's composting site. Social compliance, he will still score. I've sort of done two scenarios here, and at the best he will score an orange, probably he will score a red. And again, that's because he does comply to all sort of regulations, both him and the supplier of the wood chip, which also have to be accounted for, the tree surgeon, they comply, but they are not externally audited for that. So they have to do this criteria in a slightly different way by filling in a form. And even if you filled in that form, because you are not externally audited, you can only score an orange or a red. So there's not much that can be done about that at the system at the moment, but it's no different to most other materials. Because it's a recycled material, there is deemed to be no impact on habitat and biodiversity. The material remains in place, but the pulp is still there even after they have chopped some of the prunings off. Pollution is a similar way to social compliance. Here he can only score a 12 or a yellow, and that's because pollution is the way that criteria works is that you have to prove that in the case of a composting, you have to prove that your setup is approved by the relevant regulatory body, the Environment Agency in the UK. And because he composts at the site, which is not close to any rivers or anything like that, and because of the material he composts is very dry and very carbon rich, the windrow composting process that he has in place is seemed very adequate. There's no problem with that at all. So the composting process is approved, but in order to, and he's had no pollution incidences. They're obviously also recorded by the Environment Agency if there has been a prosecution made of a pollution incident, and that would be a pollution incident either of an effluent from a composting site, or noise pollution, or pollution of some air pollution of it. And he's had no pollution incidences at all. But in order to score a green, he would have to provide evidence of monitoring that there is no pollution. And basically for an open windrow composting site, you can't do that. The only place you could provide evidence for sort of routine monitoring would be if you're composting in vessel, where you can obviously measure the effluents that you have, you can measure the pollution that's sort of washed through the air in the air leaving the in-vessel composting. So again, the yellow here is he can't do any better. He will always score a yellow, the same as for many other situations or many other materials. For renewability, he scores a dark green, and that's because the material is renewable within 5 years. The prunings is renewable actually on an annual basis, so that will be a dark green. And the resource use efficiency, he also scores the maximum score of 20, because he has no waste in the production of the compost. If anything is screened out, not used to make the growing medium out of. It's always used as a soil improver or taken back into the composting process. So there is no waste leaving the site, basically. So he will score 20. So you can see a lot of dark greens, even more than you have for green waste compost. I was just going to mention here that an issue we have is that this wood chip compost is then mixed with vermiculite, and vermiculite hasn't officially been taken through the calculator yet, but does tend to score reds because it has a big impact on habitat and biodiversity of mining the material, and it's not renewable. But we will speed on, and just to show that sort of more generally, not only with the use of this material, we now have research in the UK that shows that the peat-free media work very well for vegetable transplants, basically all crops that are grown in containers in horticulture, even for mushroom production, where peat has traditionally been used for the casing. We now have materials that work really well. So we are very clear that we want to phase out the use of peat in organic horticulture really as soon as we possibly can. We would like to do so with immediate effect, but we've set our target that we must do so by 2025, because then organic growers could take a lead on this. The UK target is to phase it out by 2028 now in horticulture, and it is important that organic growers are phasing out the use of peat before then, and by 2028 at the very latest, because otherwise conventional growers would actually be sort of superseding, or the organic standards, if you like, would be superseded by national regulations. So we are clear that it's both technically possible, and we should make a real effort to phase out the use of peat in organic horticulture. And I'm sorry if I've taken slightly too long, but that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Ulrich Schmutz. I'm the coordinator of the Organic Plus project, and I'm also a professor for organic horticulture. And therefore this subject here, phase out of peat, has been an interest of mine and my research and the whole team at Coventry University and Garden Organic for many years. So the subject is today, we want to look at the contentious input phase out politics. So to understand a little bit more how it works to phase out a contentious input. And as you know, the project works on all different contentious inputs, and we take peat as an example because it is a very, very good example in a way to be studied. So you heard in this course already a lot of information about peat, so I can actually build on that. So first of all, the work we have done on the direct research in terms of peat alternatives, what else can we use instead of peat in terms of growing media, that was presented by Judith Conroy earlier. And then you also heard information about the environmental and sustainability assessment of the alternatives of peat, and that comes into this work package model. So now we will, and that was done by Margi Lennartsson, also from Coventry University, and now we will look into the policy support and some reflection about phase out scenarios, how to do that. And the first thing we have to see is that peat is really a long story. And it can be an example for other phase outs. There's more than 30 years of campaigning. What is of interest is the order who started first. It was first like a social movement. Some environmental campaigners saw that the destruction of peatlands then private charities, the Henry Doubleday Research Association, and the Soil Association came in later. So organic certification bodies, Demeter also, and other social movements. And only then the UK government was quite interested. I come to that in a little while. There's a reason, because only very few peat remains actually, so that triggered it. And then the EU Commission hopefully gets on it, and we are internally informing EU policymakers to take that serious. Other countries are getting into it, and worldwide it may also be taken up. So it is a long story, and I'm showing you now the example from the UK. Judith Conroy has already showed that, so I'm just showing again that it is a long story. And maybe so there was this garden organic in 1992, and what I wanted to discuss as well, that first there were voluntary targets in 2011 in the United Kingdom, and it was a phased phase out. So first local authorities, then amateur gardening and professional horticulture. But then not so much happened, and because it's voluntary, and everyone waited for things to kind of almost go away or not really do something. So a lot of time, in a way, has been wasted, and it is, and the targets were not really used in amateur gardening. So I'll show you some information again on peat, what we did in a presentation in 2013 in Vienna. And again, I said that back then, and not so much has happened. So I'm not so happy that it's going so slow. The real reason, as I said earlier, there are 5 big arguments why peat needs to go, and why in England it has such a early interest. Well, it's not only because it's environmentally interesting, because England has lost so much of the original pristine habitat. So there was really a drive to really conserve that in terms of the biodiversity which comes with peatland. And then there's 5 other good arguments to make. Ecosystem services comes in. And the interesting thing for me is also that the third argument, which was just number 3 here, climate change, in 2014, this is all presentations from 2014, has really gone up in the agenda. It was true in 2014, but it is even more true now. And now this is driving really the change for peat, and also for the drawdown, because peat bogs have also the potential to reduce the carbon pollution which we already have in the atmosphere. So this is an additional point, so that this sense of urgency. There was also an archaeological value that never really got up too much. But there's another argument, a leadership in a renewable source-based economy, which I think is also important, because when we phase out a product, we also phase in the alternative, so we become sustainable leaders. And that's also the argument I will make for organic. So I show you there is this early campaigning. Garden Organic has a campaign, don't dig for peat, fight climate change. The organic standards have initially gone into it, but not excluded all peat. So there was a little bit of a doubling. And now in 2022, the new EU regulation for organic has also allowed peat in a certain degree, and that's why we obviously picked it up in our research. That and this was shown before, that there are many peat alternatives available, and we are working on the remaining difficult bits. So we are really harvesting all the low-hanging fruits, so that's all done. But there has been, and that is work from Organic Plus, for example, for woody plant nurseries in olives, and for organic greenhouse crops on farm composting. There we have still issues, and there Organic Plus has really increased the technology readiness level of these alternatives and helped to do that. However, there is still more research needed, for the alternatives to make them really work and not be, we don't need to have any, the costs could be 10–20% higher, but not too much more, so that we don't want anyone in industry to suffer during this phase out. We want to make it as smooth as pleasant. So as I said, we haven't done anything for the amateur use because there's really no peat needed. We have done some research, and some more research is needed, and I use the technology readiness level here, which 8 means it's fairly high. 9 is already kind of nearly a product which can be marketed, so it doesn't really need research anymore. So we are quite close there. And for vegetable ornamental transplants in modules, we are also close. The remaining 2 big bits we really need more research is transplants in breast blocks, the picture on the top, because there the peat also is used to hold it together, and this is really difficult. And we had talks with industry quite recently who really explained us the challenge, and they have gone peat free on all the other issues in terms of modules, but on the blocks is still a problem. And the other remaining problem is still the mushroom casing, and I think our work on research has brought in a way clarity where peat is kind of easy to replace, some research still needed, and where are the remaining real issues. And for that, we want to suggest research. I'm just come to that in the next slide, just to go on the second part. Important is obviously that the alternatives need also be assessed, and there could also be issues in terms of energy, water, social compliance. So this is ongoing with this sustainable resourcing work, and Margi Lennartsson has explained that earlier. So now we come to the issue of when should peat be actually phased out in organic, and I repeat what is the assessment. We think organic should be the sustainable leader, and therefore by 2025 in the EU and the UK, all organic growers should really take out all peat. So that would mean we still have to work hard on the blocks and also on the mushrooms to achieve that. But we also think we need to achieve that before the UK government target comes in, currently 2028, so that organic standards are not superseded by any stricter other standards, because then we are not a sustainability leader anymore, we are just a follower, which is kind of also okay, but our customers expect better from organic. So what are the phase-out policy lessons? So I think it's clear you should use a staged phase out. The private amateur sector, and that's, I would think, is also important for other issues like copper or other things. There you can phase it already out earlier. Then in the professional sector, you need to tackle them specifically and commission research to do that, as I said before. And I also think that industry-led first has partly worked, as in the UK, because it raised the issue and helped some industry leaders, like the business we went to visit, to already develop alternatives in the way ahead. But they also need clarity, because they invest millions up to, if they are a big company, into these alternatives. So they really need clear dates. Because otherwise the innovation they are doing in these alternatives, which also comes with slightly higher costs, not too much, is not rewarded. So therefore they need really this legal framework as well. And that also was the lesson in the UK at the end, because the voluntary phase out did not achieve, because it's still used. So one needs to come up with legislation. What is also needed, in my view, is support slow adopters of the innovation, because there's still also there's a lot of them who already have peat free, but others have delayed the phase out and basically ignored all the discussion. And now they have a problem because they don't know how to grow without peat. So for them, it's a massive threat. And here we really need also address this question with advice and help these businesses, farmers, and to make this transition. Yes, so, and this, as I said, I showed that earlier, peat is number 9. It's just one of those issues we want to phase out, and we want to use this same model. And before, once the phase out is agreed, what I wanted to say is that then before you need to commission longer term research, so that the phase out, once it comes in, is as easy to reach as before. And for that, I have already proposed innovation actions, and you can see I highlighted the peat phase out in here before. So they would go like 5 to 7 years, let's say, until a certain target. Let's assume this target would be 2028. So then before, you would basically commission 7 years of research from now on to really tackle the remaining issues of peat. And especially, as I said here, if we look at peat, it would be the mushrooms, the casing on the mushrooms, and the blocks in intensive horticulture, and the others are okay. And I think this is all I wanted to say, and to explain that whole approach which we are trying to do, and also then advise the European Commission and the European Parliament when to really come up with a clear date for the end of peat and the funding for research to make the succession as smooth as possible. There's a couple of further readings which I had from also other talks, and I'll thank you very much for listening, and I hope that has triggered some thoughts in terms of how to phase out contentious inputs. There are obviously further ones like fossil fuel. So it's the more we know about how to phase out things and phase in good alternatives, the more easier it will be to tackle fossil fuels in agriculture, which will be a big thing in the future. So thank you again.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lucius Tamm. I'm coordinator of the Relax project, and I'm happy to tell you a few things of what we've achieved and can contribute to our overall objectives. Relax stands for replacement of contentious inputs in organic farming systems. It's a sister project to Organic Plus. Our objective was to evaluate solutions and to further reduce the use of external inputs, and to develop and adopt cost-efficient and environmentally safe tools and technologies too, and that's the important point, to reduce the use of copper and mineral oil in plant protection, to identify sustainable sources of plant nutrition, and to provide solutions to support livestock health and welfare. And our concept from the beginning was, of course, to build on results of previous research projects and to take far advanced solutions forward. So that's the underlying concept. We have included 13 European countries of academia, research institutions, but more importantly also many farmers associations to do on-farm research. So we have quite a large-scale consortium involving many stakeholders from different groups. This was the group when we started off. 4 years ago, in the broader context also to where research ready. Okay, this is the group photo of our consortium when we started off, and all the contributing partners there, including one of Spain. But I would like to put our activities in a broader context related to what we need to do to move forward with organic farming. So as you all know, there are some global challenges for agriculture. So like soil degradation and climate change, water use and pollution, but also loss of biodiversity. But nowadays also in the actual political situation, the yield security issue has become very important again. So we have to comply and contribute to these overall objectives to provide yields, but also to reduce the environmental impact. And as you all know, organic farming contributes or performs quite well if it comes to productivity in subsistence and smallholder farms. It creates value, added value in food chains. It has all sorts of benefits to the environment. But there is the famous yield gap. And this is one of the problems we are facing and which we have to address, and I'll come to that in a second. The benefits of organic farming and its potential contribution to agriculture have been recognized at the EU level and in many member states, in particular in Europe. And therefore, the Farm to Fork strategy foresees very ambitious goals to upscale organic farming to 25% until 2030. And what you can see here in this graph, this means a tremendous increase of the surface in a short period of time. And this puts all sorts of challenges to us, to the actors, on how to achieve this transition and how to achieve these objectives. It's logistics, it's of previous research projects, and to take far advanced solutions forward. So that's the underlying concept. We have included 13 European countries of academia, research institutions, but more importantly also many farmers associations to do on-farm research. So we have quite a large-scale consortium involving many stakeholders from different groups. This was the group when we started off. 4 years ago, in the broader context also to where research ready. The environment. We also have to replace problematic practices, and this is what Organic Plus and Relax are about. And we also have to find ways to allow for upscaling for organic farming. So that's also a major challenge in logistics. The timeline of Relax was when we started off. We started off with data collection. You know, where do we stand? What's the state of the art? We identified the needs in surveys. What is used right now? What are the alternatives? We did develop and customize available alternatives. We tested them on farm in various countries and contexts. We also looked at the socio-economic, environmental, and acceptance issues for novel solutions. And we've also developed roadmaps to be presented to the European Union on how to implement those alternatives if it's possible, and on how to reduce the use of contentious inputs. The state of play is, yes, we see, in a nutshell, yes, we see that there are alternative tools and technologies, and they may contribute to the reduction of these contentious inputs in many cases, not all. The transition to improved management practices has to involve all players along the value chain. That's totally clear. There is a different potential for introduction of alternatives, but there are also different bottlenecks in each case which may hinder the transition. So they need to be identified in each case. We need tailored support strategies from the policy side, because else nothing will change. We also identified actions that are needed at the EU level to encourage the use of alternatives and to encourage the reduction of contentious inputs. And as I said, we have drafted some roadmaps to reduce the use of contentious inputs. And those roadmaps, they have to be fair, reliable, and also implementable. It's no use to claim everything is fine if there are serious problems. What I want to raise here is we've addressed some aspects, but if we want to improve organic farming and further introduce further innovations in organic farming, really to address the demands from the world, to feed the world and so on, then it's not only about technological innovation, it's really also about social innovation and ecological innovation. And these are aspects we have not addressed in RELAX because that was not the purpose, but we have to keep in mind that these other avenues or roads for innovation need to be addressed too in order to achieve major progress for organic farming and agriculture in general. You can stop now.
Hola a tots, crec que ja em sentiu tots. Primer de tot ens volíem disculpar, no sabem què ha passat avui amb els vídeos. Hem tingut diversos problemes, no sabem per què alguns vídeos no se'ls veien els subtítols, inclús en vídeos que hem passat el mateix vídeo en altres jornades, com aquest últim del Lucius i el primer de l'Ulrich, i no sabem què ha passat, perquè han desaparegut aquests subtítols. I a més en alguns feia com un salt temporal i tornava enrere, és com si s'encallés i no funcionés. Us volem demanar disculpes, òbviament els vídeos que estaran penjats al juliol tindreu els vídeos ben muntats i amb els seus subtítols i tot, si us heu perdut qualsevol cosa. First of all, we want to apologize because the videos, they get stuck and start again in some moments. Even it was 1 or 2 videos which you couldn't see the subtitles. And obviously, all these will be fixed in the videos that we will upload in July in the platform RuralCat. Ara ja seria una mica el torn de paraules. Perdoneu. Podeu escriure la pregunta al xat que us apareix en pantalla. Ara demanarem que es connectin a la Rafaela, que connecti la Margi, la Judith i el Francis, que són les persones a qui li podeu fer preguntes sobre les seves parts. Now it's your turn to ask. You can type the questions in the chat that will appear on the bottom side of the screen. And please indicate to whom the questions are addressed in order to facilitate the answer. We have with us today Rafaela Cárceres, Margi Lennartsson, Judith Conroy, and Francis Rayns. And as well, we have Marta Bojar, who will translate the questions. I will read the questions in the language that they are made and then translate them to the other language. If they are in English, I will translate them to Catalan. If they are in Catalan, I will translate them to English. And later on, Marta will translate the persons that you ask the questions. Margi, Judith, Rafi o Francis. Jo llegiré les preguntes en català o en castellà i les traduiré a l'altra llengua, segons sigui el cas, i la Marta Bojar, que és la traductora que ha estat fent tota la gran feinada de traduir tots aquests vídeos, farà la traducció dels comentaris que facin, les respostes que tinguin la Rafi, la Judith, la Margi o el Francis. Podeu contestar als ponents, podeu contestar amb... Rafi, tu ets l'única que tens l'opció de contestar amb la llengua que vulguis, i la Marta, crec que el Francis, la Judit i la Margi puguin contestar en català, i la Margi farà la traducció a l'altra llengua, o sigui, amb el que et sentis més còmode. Francis, Judith and Margi, can you connect your camera and your microphone, please? So we will be able to see you and listen. Lovely. Hi. Oh, Ulrich is here as well. Yes. Judith, Ulrich and Francis are all together. Lovely, perfect. And so we will... tenim l'Ulrich Schmutz. Hola, Marta, què tal? Tenim l'Ulrich també aquí per contestar les preguntes que calguin. La Judit, el Francis i l'Ulrich estan connectats junts. Suposo que esteu teclejant les preguntes. De mentre dir-vos que totes les presentacions, aquesta i la de les altres 7 jornades, així com els vídeos de les 2 visites que farem aquesta setmana, estaran penjats a partir del juliol al RuralCat. Podeu allà buscar-les directament al cicle de conferències Organic Plus. Just tell you that all the videos includes as well as the 2 visits that we will do this week to the farms on Thursday and Friday. They will be uploaded to the web on July, the web RuralCat. When they are uploaded, we will send to all the people that had been subscribed. We will send a link to the conference, to the videos. A tots els que us heu inscrit, us enviarem, quan estiguin tots penjats, us enviaríem un enllaç perquè pugueu accedir a tot el cicle de jornades. Tindríem uns 15 minuts per preguntes. No sé si... Bueno. No, I don't know if any of you want to make or clarify any point, mostly because we had some problems with the videos. Well, look, they say, regarding to the tree nursery peat-free substrate research that is being carried on in the UK, which are the main ingredients you are working on? Diu que referent al planter d'arbres, el substracte per fer planter d'arbres que s'està fent la recerca a Anglaterra, quins són els principals ingredients amb els que estan treballant? I don't know if that's for Francis, Judith? Yeah.
We're a little bit confused because we're not particularly working on tree nurseries in the UK. I think in Turkey they were working specifically on olive trees and looking at growing media for olives. Vale. In the UK we were looking at media for vegetable transplants. I don't know, maybe Margi, have you got anything to add there?
trees?
No, I agree. I mean, we're obviously within Organic Plus not working on tree nursery production. I suppose I could mention that within conventional production systems, there's been a lot of research in the UK, including on growing trees and other sort of ornamentals as well. And I guess the most commonly used materials overall are mixtures usually of different bark products, nowadays often mixed with wood fiber in different proportions, and I would say also usually including some green waste compost or green compost, sometimes a bit of coir. So they're normally blends of those four materials: bark, wood fiber, coir and green compost. And I think particularly for tree nurseries where the nutrient requirement is quite low, there tends to be a lot of, but sort of things like drainage needs to be good, quite high inclusions of both the bark products and the wood fiber products within that.
One other thing just to add is that, and this comes back to something that was said about systems solutions rather than kind of sort of technological solutions, is that in the UK at least a lot of trees, things like apple trees, are grown and grown in the field soil and then dug up and sold as bare root transplants, and so there's not actually any growing media involved in that.
Can I add something?
We leave Marta to translate this part, Rafaela, and then you complement it. Thanks.
That's the good thing with translation. You have so much.
Sí? Se'n sent?
Sí, se't sent.
Bé, primer la part del Regne Unit, que crec que parlava en Francis, no sé si era en Francis o l'Ulrich, crec que era en Francis. Ha comentat que ells no han investigat amb arbres, sinó amb planters per hortalisses. Per tant, aquesta pregunta no la poden respondre, però sí que la Margi, ella ha comentat que a Turquia sí que han treballat amb oliveres. Això és el que poden dir. Després la Margi ha comentat que sí que sap que a Anglaterra s'ha investigat bastant amb arbres i que els ingredients que s'han utilitzat, ha dit escorça, ha dit fibra de fusta, adob verd, green compost, i fibra de coco. Que també és cert que la necessitat de nutrients en els arbres és més baixa i que, per tant, no és tan rellevant. I, finalment, el Francis ha afegit que el que es fa en el cas dels arbres són solucions més en el sistema, no tan tecnològiques. Doncs fan el trasplantament directament d'arrel i, per tant, tampoc és un material que es faci servir tant en el cas dels arbres. Fins aquí. Resumit, és això.
Perfecte. Sí, deia Rafi?
Yes, I would like to share an experience we did some years ago. We worked with Belloc Forestal, which is a nursery that are devoted to tree growth. And we use in this case the crushed forest biomass of Mediterranean forest with solid fraction of cattle slurry in order to increase the nitrogen content of the product. And this operational group was during only 2 years. That is a scarce time to check results. But what we have concluded is that we probably need a very stable product, because if you want to grow trees, you need a long time there to grow the tree, several years. And it's not the same what happens in another kind of culture, like seedlings or other kind, like aromatic plants or other that you have a short time the substrate into the taste. And another thing, what we concluded is it is needed like a fiber product in order to increase the stability of the mixture, and also to have a more retention water properties of the mixture.
Vale. Comenta, m'he perdut amb la petita porció que porta la biomassa forestal mediterrània.
Sí,
m'he perdut en aquest ingredient.
Sí, és una barreja entre residu forestal triturat i la fracció sòlida del purí de vaques lleteres. Sí, slurry és purí.
Sí, perdona, no he entès. Val, bé, doncs comenta que això, que han treballat amb biomassa triturada de bosc mediterrani, en el cas dels arbres amb els que han treballat, barrejada amb una petita porció de purins de vaques lleteres, com acaba de dir, i això el que fa és augmentar el nitrogen, correcte? I que la conclusió és que es necessita un producte molt estable perquè, a diferència de les hortalisses, els arbres triguen molt a créixer. I una altra conclusió que s'ha tret és que per estabilitzar la barreja i augmentar la retenció d'aigua es necessita afegir fibra.
Vull aclarir que no és la barreja amb el purí, sinó que és amb la part sòlida d'aquest purí. És una certa proporció de nitrogen. Pot ser també fems de cavall o un altre tipus de font amb més nitrogen que no pas els residus forestals.
Okay, well, we had up to 11:45 for questions. It's 11:42, so with 3 minutes, but there are no more questions. So unless any of the speakers want to add anything or say something, I would rather finish the session. Teníem fins a 3:15 i són 42, falten 3 minuts, i a no ser que algun dels ponents vulgui afegir alguna cosa o complementar-la, doncs donaria la sessió per tancada. Rafi, anything to add?
Well, I probably asked to the UK partners about how to increase the awareness of this issue in the Mediterranean countries, because or in the South countries in general, because we have not peatlands, and sometimes it's not easy to change our mind to change this conception and to try to change to use another kind of products with less peat. How to change in our conditions?
La Rafi pregunta, vol preguntar-los als companys del Regne Unit, els 4, com incrementar la preocupació, com fer que hi hagi interès en solventar, o sigui, en substituir o en buscar alternatives a aquest tema que és el de la torba, sobretot en poblacions mediterrànies com les nostres, on no es percep com un problema i com fer aquest canvi de xip. Did you understood, UK people?
Yeah, I'll start just with I probably don't know enough about public policy, but certainly one thing that's changed recently in the UK is that a lot of the argument is hinged on the biodiversity and habitat loss and other factors, such as the fact that peat is a carbon store and the role that peatlands play in flood attenuation, that they've been there. But a lot of people have based the argument on the habitat and biodiversity loss. The thing that seems to have gained ground in recent years, in the last probably only 2 or 3 years, is the role of peatlands as a carbon sink, because of the climate change situation and because of increasing efforts to sequester more carbon in the soil, that the carbon sink argument seems to have raised the profile of peat. And it certainly seems to be one of the motivations for the government moving more in the direction of moving towards a peat ban. So that's something that's changed in recent years. But I think overall consumer awareness of peat still isn't very high, but it has steadily crept up over the last few years, but it's been a long, slow process. I don't know whether or not maybe Margi or Ulrich can probably explain other things better than me.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, I would agree with you. I think it's definitely, we've seen a shift to the main driver being sort of the targets to have a zero carbon economy and basically all carbon counts. There's been lots of calculations of how much of the carbon sink is, if you like, released if we mine peat, and how much is sort of sequestered if we keep it there, and yes, I mean the peat bog is one of the major carbon sinks that we have, and we have to remember that it's a bit like it's fossil fuel basically. It's a carbon sink that if we leave it there, we really can't do with having the carbon out in the atmosphere at the moment, because that, you know, we can ill afford to deal with it, and that's I would say is really sort of what's driving it all, and putting a much greater emphasis on it in terms of reducing it all. And Judith is right, the process has been very slow. I mean, there has been much reluctance amongst both professional growers and gardeners for many years to convert to peat. But we see that is sort of gradually changing. I think that last year and this year has been a big shift in the UK, and there's now much more demand both on the professional level for professional growers and garden growers to source peat-free products, and the sales are going up. I mean, unfortunately, or fortunately in some ways, with the pandemic, we also see a much greater interest in gardening altogether, and therefore the overall demands have for growing media has gone up. So the use of peat in terms of volumes, I'm not quite sure what it's like this year, but certainly last year we didn't have enough peat alternatives on the market, so people resorted to buying peat-free products still. But the amounts of peat-free products is definitely going up as well. And I think also there has been a great shift in that people have increased in confidence in the peat alternatives that are on the market. So I think there's been long been reported that the sort of what I normally refer to the first generation of peat alternatives, there was a lot of bad press about them, that they didn't work. But I think it's taken years and years, but we have eventually sort of overcome that, and people have much greater confidence in how they're going to be performing.
Vale.
Yeah, just to add, we will pick this subject up on Biofach. So Margi will give another presentation on that thing. So we just have to, you know, raise the awareness slowly, and then it hopefully it will change. There's a workshop at Biofach in Nuremberg in the World Organic Fair. So we hope, you know, this message is taken up.
I mean, I would say, I would still really urge that we need to do something within the organic sector very soon, and we need to do that in the whole of Europe in order to maintain really this sort of environmental credential and integrity of our organic standards. This is really where we have an opportunity to do something. And although I appreciate that there's going to be difficulties among the growers, they're going to be reluctant to do so. I see it quite similar to the reluctance that we had, when was it, 10, 15 years ago, for growers to change from using conventionally raised transplants, and where we introduced the rules that you had to use organically grown transplants. And the growers had their arms up saying, we cannot possibly do that. You know, the organic transplants don't work. But actually, the deadline came, and I would say within 1 or 2 years, the whole matter was sorted out, basically. And they are all now very successfully using organically raised transplants, the ones that buy them in. So I think it just needs a bit of a push and a force to do it, and it can be done, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Xènia, has traduït, oi, la pregunta de la Rafaela? Vale, això ja està, doncs. Bé, la recapitulo per si de cas. La seva pregunta era que com aquí no en som conscients ni tan sols la població normal de què és la torba, potser, i allà sí que és un tema més proper, doncs com podem fer per traslladar aquest problema al nostre ambient, al Mediterrani, no? Aquests països on no és una cosa tan propera. I la Judith ha comentat que el que els ha funcionat a ells, que també fa un temps van tenir aquest problema, és quan es relaciona amb una pèrdua de biodiversitat, d'hàbitat pels animals i, sobretot, el fet que la torba és un magatzem de diòxid de carboni i que, amb tot el tema del canvi climàtic, evidentment, cada emissió de CO2 compta i que per aquesta via ha funcionat molt el tema de que la gent cada cop en sigui més conscient. Sí que és cert que tant ella com la Margi han comentat que ha sigut un procés lent, o sigui, no és una cosa d'un dia per l'altre, però a base d'anar insistint i anar explicant els problemes, doncs la població ara n'és conscient, sobretot perquè ara estem, com diu la Margi, buscant economies basades en zero emissions, que sabem que és un objectiu que no és a curt termini, però que tothom sap de què van aquests temes i que, evidentment, la torba és un magatzem de diòxid, també ho ha comentat, i que si s'utilitza corba s'està alliberant diòxid de carboni a l'atmosfera. També recalca ella que és un procés que ha portat molt de temps, però que veuen que cada cop hi ha més consciència per part dels agricultors, tant professionals com gent que té horts a casa seva i tal, que la torba no s'hauria d'utilitzar. Que no és que s'utilitzi més, però sí que és cert que arrel de la pandèmia la demanda, el volum de medis de cultiu que s'han requerit va augmentar i com no s'esperava això, no hi havia suficient disponibilitat d'alternatives i encara que no es volgués, hi ha gent que ha hagut de fer servir la torba perquè no hi havia una altra alternativa en aquest moment. Això va passar l'any passat i s'espera que fos puntual per la pandèmia. També un altre tema que comenta és que al principi les alternatives no tenien gaire bona fama i això amb el temps també ha canviat, que això també és part del fet que el procés hagi sigut tan lent. L'Ulrich comenta que la Margi té una presentació específica en aquest tema. No m'ha quedat clar on. Sí.
Perdó, el Biofac.
Vale, res a veure amb l'Organic Plus, doncs no. Vull dir, no són les presentacions.
És una mena de fira internacional molt coneguda en el món de l'agricultura ecològica.
Correcte, doncs això ha comentat, que la Margi tracta aquest tema. I finalment la Margi comenta que el cas el veu similar a quan fa 15 anys s'utilitzaven planters convencionals i ara ja és molt normal que se n'utilitzin d'ecològics i que és una cosa que porta temps però que allà va. Igual que s'ha aconseguit, també es pot aconseguir.
Bé, doncs ara sí, ara que ja hem arribat al moment final, només agrair als ponents, a la Margi, la Judith, l'Ulrich i el Francis i la Rafaela, la seva presència, i qualsevol altra cosa, ja sabeu, a partir del juliol trobareu totes les presentacions, i agrair a la Marta l'esforç, perquè sé que quan comencen a fer molts conceptes costa, això sí, faràs un llibret, sí, un recull de traduccions. Doncs això, dir-vos que aquest dijous no hi ha sessió perquè fem la visita a Aurora del Camp i la visita a ramaderia la fem divendres i que ja el següent dia parlarem del tema dels plàstics el 21 de juny, que ha de ser un dimarts, si no m'equivoco. D'acord? Vinga, vagi bé. Thank you very much, everybody. Just say thanks to Margi, Judith, Ulrich, Francis, and Rafi, and Marta as well for the hard work she has to do translating all the opinions. And we will just set you to the next session that will be in a week time, the 21st, that we will talk about alternative to plastics. Because this Tuesday and Friday, the ones that we are here with the heat wave, we will be visiting the farms. So you will find a video from the visits on the farms as well in July in Rural Cat web. Gràcies a tots.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Genia.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Enjoy the heat wave. Some of it over here.
They are doing, I think. Thank you for organising, Xenia, as well, and thank you for translating, Marta. And really good to work with you all.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Gràcies a tots.
Bye.
Bye.
Adéu.
Yes. So is it not Thursday then?